Hello, my name is Jane O'Rourke. I'm a child, adolescent and family psychotherapist and the founder of Mind in Mind. And it's my great pleasure that we're here today to honour Dr. Penelope Leach and her significant contribution to our understanding of babies and their families during a career spanning almost 60 years. We worked it out just before it was 60 years next year, I think. So really an incredible amount of time and energy. It's been her life's work, being at the centre of so many issues that affect children. On Mind in Mind, we're interviewing some of the greatest pioneers of child mental health, people who've made substantial contributions to the well-being of children and families like Penny. What began Mind in Mind and is our driving force is the need of parents and the people who work with children to have access to the wisdom of the wisest minds in child mental health. On our website, MINDinMIND.org.uk, you'll find interviews and blogs with practitioners who for decades have worked in the service of the mental well-being of children. They're shining luminaries in their field, people such as Iska Wittenberg, Joanna Williams, Lydia Tischler, and Monica Laniado. You'll also find an interview with child psychotherapist Dilys Dawes, who for over 50 years has given so much in the service of children and parents. And I'm delighted she's also joining us today to talk about some aspects of her work with Penelope. So the order of service today is that we'll begin by hearing from Penelope herself, and then I'll come to some invited members of our audience who want to share their thoughts about the impact Penelope has had on the field of infant mental health. In addition to Dilys Dawes, we've got Robin Bell-Burney and Dr. Sebastian Kramer talking about their work with Penelope for the Association of Infant Mental Health. And Professor Jacqueline Barnes is also with us, and we'll be discussing with Penelope their research together on childcare, one of the largest projects in the world ever undertaken. Can I just ask, if you haven't got yourself on mute, could you please put yourself on mute? Thank you. So also we have Dr. Graham Music. He's here talking about the contribution Penelope has made to the understanding of infant mental health and how she's helped millions of parents around the world. Neil Leach, CEO of the Early Years Alliance, and Teresa Johnson from the Professional Association for Childcare and Early Years will also be joining us to discuss some of the many, many issues today that are close to Penelope's heart, such as the issue of the baby blind spot. You can find a brilliant thought piece about that on our website, in which she argues that politicians and policymakers are ignoring the needs of babies. And I'm sure there's going to be more of that issue to come today. So we have a treat in store for you, an amazing lineup of brilliant clinicians, researchers and campaigners, alongside our legacy interviewee today, Penelope Leach. 2 hours of all things babies and families from the leading lights of the infant mental health field. So welcome to you all. It's a real pleasure to have you all here. In the last 20 to 30 minutes or so today, we'll be also welcoming comments and questions from our ticket holders. You can use the chat function for that. And if you're experiencing any technical difficulties, then please, one of the boxes is our tech help. That's Andrew Hirsch, and he'll hopefully be able to help you. So our legacy interviewee, Penelope Leach. Penelope, how's it feeling with all these people gathered here today to honour you?
Amazing, terrifying, sort of inaccurate in a way, because none of this has been just me. It's been me and a lot of people, some of whom I'm glad to say are here today, all working towards the same ends. In fact, only last week, or maybe the week before, the National Children's Bureau published a letter from 140 organisations begging government to do the kind of thing we're all asking government to do. So while I'm hugely honoured, don't get me wrong, it's not just my 60 years.
I mean, and you're always very modest about your achievements, Penelope, and you're always at pains to point out that that it's so many other people that have contributed into this field. But I think, and of course there are, and many of them we're featuring on Mind in Mind, and many of our predecessors who've come before us, people like John Bowlby and Mary Main and Renee Spitz and Donald Winnicott. And they are all people that you greatly admire and have really influenced your work. But I would say, you know, having spoken to you and so many times in preparation for this interview and read so much of your work, I really do believe that you and your contribution to the study of infancy and your hugely influential books and television series and your campaigning on children's rights have been so significant that you also deserve your place in the same Hall of Fame as many of those greats. And what marks you out, Penelope, as the leading psychologist of your generation, has been your ability to communicate what you've learned to a wider audience. And few researchers have really been able to achieve this. But in doing so, you've influenced millions of parents, and by extension, their children all around the world. So much so, they're sometimes called Penelope Leach babies. And it was your book for parents, Your Baby and Child, first written in 1977, and the later accompanying award-winning TV series, which really first catapulted you to fame and perhaps made you the Dr. Sparkle, Truby King of your generation.
No, not Truby King, please, not Truby King.
Okay. But 3 million copies of those books have been sold, haven't they? I think more than 3 million, in fact. And it's become a generation, become a Bible for generations of parents. How did it come into being? What prompted you to write that book?
It was an accident. In fact, it was against all my intentions. I was a MRC fellow, combining research with being the mother of a first child. And I had actually sworn that I would never try to tell parents what to do, because I didn't know what to do in any general sense. And then there came a personal event that made it impossible for me to go on combining my research job, though I kept the fellowship, I'm glad to say, with being a mother. My son got meningitis and was desperately ill. And I tried, I'm ashamed of this, it's one of the few things I am ashamed of. I tried to go back to work because my colleagues, having been very nice about my taking time off in the first week, got increasingly pushy. When are you coming back? When will you be here? Will you be here for the meeting in February? And I thought that it was desperately important that I should go back. So I did go back, and it was desperately important that I stay home. This 2-year-old was in a state of panic, and the only person he trusted was me. So removing myself for the working day was disastrous. I think and hope that nowadays everybody would have made it possible for me to take the time I needed. I think if I could have had 3 months, I could have gone on with the research. But it's a long time ago now. Anyway, I left, and I had a certain amount of work from the fellowship, but not enough. And I thought, now I'm pushing a buggy across Parliament Hill Fields and meeting up with a lot of other mothers and realizing what a lot I know from the research that they don't know from mothering, and how much it helps. And actually the thing that was making the biggest difference at that point was Berry Brazelton's first big potty training study, which was the first time evidence had been brought forward that we really shouldn't start potty training children till they were 18 months to 2. So I thought, I'll write some of this. I'm not going to tell parents what to do, but I'm going to try and tell them some of what I know. And that was Babyhood, which was my first book, published in 1974. I'm still saying to myself, and indeed the preface says, this is a book about bringing up babies, but it doesn't tell you what to do. And I got a lot of press, a lot of letters from parents, and many of them said, how lovely to have a book about bringing up babies that doesn't tell us what to do. But could you please tell me what to do about Amelia's thumb sucking? And so it went, you know, it became clear that a lot of parents find it really difficult to make that jump from professional research to their own parenting. And that was why, when I was approached to write Your Baby and Child, I dropped my principle of not telling people what to do and said, yes, I would. And I have to be glad, because the success of that book, which was largely luck, was a question of being in the right place at the right time, being the right gender. There hadn't been a woman writing about this stuff, made possible most of what I did afterwards. So I'm extremely grateful for that.
Yeah. I've been looking at reviews of your book from parents, and I thought I'd read you a couple. I first read this book when I borrowed it from the local library in 1979, shortly before having my first baby. I'm rather ashamed to say that I never returned it because it was so good. That first copy saw me through both of my daughters, and I've recommended it to most pregnant women I've known ever since. My library copy eventually disappeared, and so when my first baby was having a baby of her own, I bought a new copy for each of us. It's still filled with as much great advice and practical, sensible guidelines. I honestly believe that my children and grandson have benefited enormously from Penelope Leach's wonderful book.
Well, that's lovely. What more could anybody who writes a book possibly ask? But society has changed, even though babies haven't changed much. And that's why, like an idiot, I've done it all again for parents of the present, and that'll be out after Christmas.
That's great that you're going to be doing another edition of that.
Well, it's a new version. It's more than an edition. It's a new version. You know, it's got some of the same stuff in it, obviously, but it's a different book.
And so what are you going to include that you haven't before?
Oh, all kind. I mean, when I first wrote Your Baby and Child, men were the earners and women were the carers. You know, things have changed so much in a number of ways, and a lot of things weren't discussed at all, like, well, gender hardly came into it. So there wasn't a lot that was wrong, but there was a lot that needed updating.
So I know you feel passionately about the role of fathers, and so you're going to expand that in this book, are you?
Yes, not just the role, but the feelings and the existence of not just fathers, actually, but partners. You know, a father could be a woman, if you see what I mean.
So another quote here from a grateful reader. I was given this book by a friend when my first baby was born, and it became like a Bible for my husband and I. It sat on my bedside table for ages, and whenever something different was happening with our baby, we would consult Penelope any time, day or night. It became very well used and a bit grubby for me. It was a really useful, reassuring and supportive book. I've now brought the updated version to give to a young friend when she has her first baby. I'm sure she will find it as comforting, as helpful as I did 30 years ago. Well, what do you think? Did you aim to be comforting?
Depends what the current problem is. One of the most fun things in the days when I was being popular in America, and there would be big queues of people wanting me to sign books after lectures and so on. And the fun thing was to pick up their book and shake it, and where it fell open was what their problem was. It might fall open at breastfeeding or potty training or weaning or whatever, but I could always tell, because there was always a bit of the book that had been used 10 times as much as the rest.
So you were born in 1937. You were sometimes separated from your mother during the war. Do you think this has perhaps contributed to you quite strongly identifying with the needs of babies, and also your interest in attachment theory.
Yes, only let's remember I was one of, I don't know how many million, but millions and millions of babies and toddlers and small children were separated during that period. What I think was important to me was that I wasn't explained to, and what it taught me was that it's always better to tell small children, even if you think they won't understand. And very briefly, I'd been evacuated with my older sister, and we were now to move to my grandparents and spend a night in London with my mother and father on the way. And I knew we were going to see Mummy, whom I'd been yearning for, but nobody thought to tell me we were only staying a night. I thought we were going home. So when it came to the point and I was taken away again, that's what really, really hurt.
Yeah. And so I think a lot of your work emphasizes the importance of the mother-infant relationship, and particularly the mother's influence prenatally and in the first few months, which I think is often disregarded, isn't it?
That's the thing that I am very surprised we still haven't really understood or acted upon, because so much of our treatment of young families starts too late. I mean, if you look at the COVID, recent COVID regulations, almost all the concern has been for children of school age or just below school age and missing their education. Almost no attention was paid during the lockdowns to the emotional impact on mothers with babies and small children. Yet, I can't imagine any age group that would have been harder hit. And if I may put in a personal bit, when my son, panic-stricken 2-year-old, came out of hospital, the thing that he was most afraid of was any face that was wearing a mask. And that was for the obvious reason that he'd had blood taken by nurses in masks and so on in hospital. But just think for a minute, all our babies have been brought up during this last 18 months, having to get used to masks, not at home, admittedly, but everywhere else. And we don't seem to keep our eye on the youngest children. And above all, perhaps, we don't keep our eye on pregnant women and what is happening to their babies. We still don't, I think, really believe that it is a woman's womb that creates the baby she's carrying. And we could do so much to improve the outcome. I mean, for example, a recent Danish study shows that if we adopted some of Denmark's pre- and postnatal behaviours, we'd save just over 1,000 baby deaths a year. And that's last week's finding.
Gosh, that is incredible, isn't it? And do you know what some of those things are that we should be adopting? Did it detail?
Well, one-on-one care, care with partner or whoever is serving as partner emotionally, but above all, stress. I mean, I think the thing that's easiest to understand that we've learned is that stress in a pregnant woman, stress that raises her cortisol levels in her bloodstream, raises the cortisol levels going across the placenta to the baby. And if that goes on for a long time or happens very often, it actually affects brain development. And this is not a message a lot of people want to hear, because none of us live stress-free lives, and we don't want to think that the row we had with a partner last night may have done the baby damage. But nevertheless, we have to realise that the most stress-free pregnancy possible is something that we owe to the baby.
And so is this part of the baby blind spot that you talk about?
The baby's, sorry, didn't hear you.
Baby blind spot.
Oh, yes. I mean, the baby blind spot really lasts till about 3, as far as I can see. I mean, there are people here who work in mental health with very much younger children, and all thanks to them. But on the whole, if you've got a deeply troubled year-old baby, you're not going to get mental health help. It just isn't there, doesn't exist. On the other hand, if you've got a 4-year-old with major behavior disorders, you may have to wait a few months, but you will get help eventually.
Yeah, so it's this early intervention that you think is so important.
Early intervention, but early intervention that starts before birth, not 3 years after.
Mm-hmm. I'm interested in, you know, I can, and I'm sure everyone can hear just how passionate you are about the rights of babies and children. And it's interesting the balance you have in your books for parents, that what you offer is very much guidance rather than instruction. But you're not afraid of having quite strong views, for example, about hitting children, for example.
No, I think deliberately hurting a very small child. Actually, I'm not a great one for deliberately hurting anybody of any age, but we're talking about small children. I think deliberately causing pain in the name of discipline or good behavior is one of the few things I would be prepared to say wrong. And if I may, a very quick story. A young couple came to me who'd come from Boston, where they were following the teaching of their pastor in the church, who was, you know, giving lots of childcare lectures and what have you. And he had been teaching them not to let a baby put his fingers in his dinner dish. He was to keep his hands in his lap while they fed him with a spoon. This baby, like most babies, dabbling in the food was part of the eating. So when they purchased the little rod that was actually being sold in the church for hitting babies, and they were told, hit his hand every time he puts it in the dish. By the time he came to me, he'd given up eating altogether. He was being fed by stomach tube, and these parents were in despair because they'd meant to do what it was right to do. They'd been told that was the thing to do, and now look. So yes, sometimes it seems to me that I do know right from wrong, but not very often. Mostly, I think parents have to do what feels right to them. But just if hitting your 9-month baby with a stick feels right to you, then sorry, doesn't feel right to me.
Yeah, I could see looks of horror on the screen there when you were telling that story, Penelope. It really is shocking.
It is true. It's an actual true story. I didn't make it up, honest.
And you said to me when we talked recently about that, you said that discipline is seen as relevant much too early.
Sorry, what's...
You said discipline is seen as relevant
much
too early. That, you know, disciplining a child comes much too early, I think.
I think that's because sort of basic neuroscience isn't paid enough attention to. The truth does seem to be, and if you listen to people like Alan Shaw or Berry or Perry, it seems clear that the cerebral cortex, the upper part of the brain, which eventually will make this baby a human being rather than any other kind of mammal, is almost completely unformed at birth. It takes at least 3/4 of the first year to form, by which time the brain will have doubled in size. To try and teach discipline, to try and teach virtually anything in those first months is certainly useless and often very unfortunate. The only kind of behavior that really works, I think, even with toddlers come forward a year, is sort of what happens when, if I spill my drink on purpose, am I going to get another? Maybe I'm not. Maybe if I've spilled it, it's not going to be refilled. That seems to me the kind of cause and effect that is understood quite early. But punishment, doing something unpleasant, whether it's pain or time out or whatever, hardly ever has the effect you want. And if you've got a toddler at the dining table, grandparents are there, you want everybody to behave nicely, and he isn't, put him on a step for time out. No, put him on your knee for time in. You're not going to get good behavior by trying to banish him, because what he's probably saying is, everybody's getting more attention than me. So it is partly a question of timing. Things do change very much in the late second and third years.
I mean, it makes sense, doesn't it, Penny? But at the same time, a lot of parents do give their children time out. And I think, sometimes it's seen by parents as a way of taking a break for them away from their child so that they don't do anything worse. And I think, when you look at the research, it seems very clear that what you say time in is much better than time out. But so it does make sense on one level, but also it can make parents feel very guilty when they hear you say something like that, can't it?
You mean it makes people feel guilty?
Yeah, it can make parents feel guilty.
It only makes people feel guilty if they actually think that what's being said is right. And no parent is going to feel guilty about their own behavior if they believe in it. So if what I'm saying makes them think and maybe even rethink, maybe even experiment with another way of doing things. I mean, sometimes a timeout of a 6-year-old is necessary to protect the 3-year-old that she's bullying, but she doesn't have to sit in a boring place with no toys. She can sit and paint in her playroom or whatever place she uses for play. The nasty aspect of it is purely punitive. And that's what I think people need to think about. Do I want this to be nasty, or do I only want to sort out the 2 children and stop them quarrelling?
Blake Morrison wrote about you, what we resent is not that she's occasionally wrong, that she's mostly right. Our priorities are wrong, but we don't know how to change them while also remaining active, wage earning and employed. Her stern message is that we could be doing better by our children, and she knows that this is what makes us angriest of all.
Yes. I mean, what can I say? I think that's true.
And so is your message, what's your views on, say, sleep training? This is also
what training?
On sleep training. It's also
sleep training. Oh God, don't get me on sleep training. For any further followers here, no, sleep training is very much what I was half referring to when I said that babies under a year weren't going to learn these lessons. And babies who are left, however long they cry, or left to cry for periods of time that are measured on a clock, before being visited, and then left again and left again and left again, will eventually go to sleep. I mean, no human baby is going to cry forever. Some of them throw up, and The strict Ferberites will tell you don't go and change the sheet because you'll disturb this baby who's nearly asleep, so leave it to sleep in its own vomit. And they do learn in the sense that they give up. Is that what you want? Do you want your baby not to cry for you because she knows nobody will come? Any more than do you want your baby to keep hands out of the food dish because she knows she'll get hit? It's a question of thinking what you're actually trying to do. And the sleep one is really important because I mean, every parent I've ever asked for the worst part of bringing out a baby is sleep deprivation. So this is one that gets to everybody.
Yeah. You said to me that what you want parents to really know, or crucially parents to be to know, is that nothing will ever be the same again after you've had a baby. The implication being that you want parents to think really hard before embarking on what is going to be a life-changing force in your life.
Yes, that's true, but it's a bit of a long shot of a want, isn't it? Because I think the difficulty really is this wretched biological clock. You know, lots of women, and quite a lot of women that I've known, don't want children, or think they don't want children, or are very much enjoying their careers or their relationships or whatever. And then, partly because of something people say, partly because that birthday was the 38th, they suddenly think, am I going to be sorry? Should I quickly have a baby while I've still got time? And I don't know a way around that, except that if our society was more accepting of the possibility that not everybody wants to have children, if that was really okay, then I think it would be much easier for people. And, you know, it isn't quite okay. As far as I can see, there's always a mother-in-law or an aunt or somebody saying, when are you going to give us a baby? Sometimes a partner. So I don't know the answer to it, but I am very sure that messages about getting back to normal, which are all over the internet in parenting advice, getting back to normal after birth, are very, very misleading. You're not going to get back to normal. You're going to make a new normal, which is the normal of you as a mother or father, not the normal of before.
Yeah. And I'm interested in what you're saying about parents, and how your own experience of your parents separating when you were about 12, and you went on to write a book for divorcing parents, putting your children first when you divorce, how to parent together when you're apart. How did your own experience affect your research in this area?
Well, I think it undoubtedly made me particularly interested in it. I think all personal experience feeds in that way. And in my career, always, I've had a kind of ditch running through the middle of what I do, which has professional research one side of it and parenting stuff the other. And that's certainly true of divorce. There wasn't anything when I published this book, which is 3 years ago now, which actually spoke out of the mouths of children. And that's what I set out to do, to help parents hear what it meant to their children and how perhaps things could be done better. I mean, for example, people thought that by the time a child was of university age, or in his 20s maybe, a divorce wouldn't bother him. Least, why should it? He's got his own life, he's got his own sex relationships and so on. Actually, it turns out that what it does to those older young people is throw disbelief and appall over the whole of their childhood thus far. We thought we were happy, we thought you were happy insofar as we thought about you at all, which is probably not much. And now you tell us this, it spoils everything. And the effect on those older young people is just as devastating, if different, from the effect on younger children.
And it's the toxicity between the parents that can really affect the children, isn't it?
Absolutely. And the only thing that I think perhaps one can fairly say to parents, you know, we don't know why they're separating. We don't know why they can't live together. It's not for anybody else to comment on that. But mutual parenting is something that almost every couple can hang on to. And that's what makes the difference. It's terrifying how few couples you meet, particularly if you're in the courts, which I was for a while, who genuinely don't talk ill of the partner. People just do. It slips out. They can't help it. And that, I think, is the thing that does the most damage. If you can convince your children that they're still loved by both parents and that the parents recognize each other as good parents, though not as good partners, you'll save an awful lot of misery.
And there's this huge gulf, isn't there, between what we know. You referred to how much we already know about prenatal life and the importance of the mother, for example. So there's this real gulf between what we know and what policymakers are doing in and around childhood. And you seem to have spent your career trying to bridge that gap. And I would imagine sometimes it's taken a certain amount of courage to do this.
I don't know about courage so much as frustration. You know, there are thousands of researchers and therapists and social workers and other people concerned with children who are concerned with these issues and who would agree with a large part of what I'm saying. We've got words and words and words, but we haven't got any action. No. And, you know, I couldn't stop altogether because I live in a world where we've just cut £20 a week off benefits instead of adding £40 a week to benefits for people with young children. Are we all aware that somebody with 3 kids isn't getting any extra money these days? Used to, once upon a time, my biological father played a part in the green ration books for children in the Second World War. But, you know, we have this gap. We don't seem to take much notice of them. And we fuss for school dinners, quite rightly. School dinners in holidays is really important. But what about nappies? What about formula? And so forth.
In 2018, you assembled 25 leading edge contributors to the book Transforming Infant Wellbeing Research, Policy and Practice for the First 1001 Critical Days. And Steve Budolph wrote about it and said that you were calling for a revolution when you wrote that book, or when you edited the book. What were you most hoping to bring about? What revolution would you like to see?
Oh, really, the one we've been talking about, a children first revolution. I've had people say to me, why should children come first? Why should I put my children first? Why shouldn't I come first? And of course, the answer is that we're all children first. That's why. And the kind of children we become and the kind of adolescents we become and the kind of adults we become and the kind of parents we may become all depend on those first 1001 critical days. that's why children first. But
we're going to be hearing from some of them now, actually. So alongside your books for parents, you've also been a hugely powerful influence in child professional organisations. You were one of the founders of the Association for Infant Mental Health in the UK, alongside Dilys Dawes, Sebastian Kramer, who's with us, and Robin Balbirnie. They're all here today. Dilys, if you want to unmute your microphone, we're going to come to you first. Dilys is a child psychotherapist who, like Penelope, has an ability to influence government policy and collaborate with different child professions. Dilys, you instigated the setting up of the Association of Infant Mental Health. I think it was in 1996. Tell us about your work with Penelope.
Yes, well, what happened was that in 1995, my husband, Derek Rayner, and I were speaking at the Australian Association for Infant Mental Health, and I was so impressed with it and with the way in which the different disciplines working with infants and their families were getting together to do it. And on the plane journey coming back, the long plane journey, and I think that was inspiration born of boredom, I thought, we can do that. And when I got back the next day to London, I actually wrote to various distinguished people, and especially Penelope, and who wrote back also straight away saying, yes, we should found that. So the first meeting that we actually had was in 1996 at the Tavistock, and it included Penny, and I've got a list here. There was Joan Raphael.
I think
a few other people. Yes. Pardon?
So I just missed that, Dilys. I think your screen just froze. You said it was Joan Raphael was joined you, and who else was there?
Lynn Murray and Alan Stein, Chani Kumar, and a few other people. I didn't ask Sebastian straight away because I very foolishly thought that I shouldn't poach him from the Child Psychotherapy Trust, which I had been running. Yes. So I waited a few weeks before I realised we couldn't actually manage without him. And Juliet Hopkins also joined us. So those are people who were there right at the beginning and have been ever since.
I think Juliet's with us today, so welcome to Juliet. It's lovely to see you.
Good, yes. Yes.
Sorry, Dilys, I was going to ask you, what was the work that you did together with Penny and Sebastian and others?
Yeah, well, a great deal, I think, of actually supporting the things that a lot of us were doing individually. Mm-hmm. And I think the main point of it was actually to support other professions, to get them to join us, that the ones who had less training could actually be helped to really develop what they were doing. And to get the ideas that we had, not just to each other, but widely to the public. And as you know, Penny's been the one who's done that, most of all of us, several millions more than most of us. Yes.
And that really is a skill of hers, isn't it? Being able to communicate to a wider audience.
Yes, yes. And to do it in a way that people really take on, yes. Although some of the times when I was chairing one of her talks, I would point out that practically everybody in the audience had her books there, and had read it, and that some of them actually wanted to disagree with her about putting their babies first. Yes, so that was my joke, yes. But I think actually it actually took on, and that there was a way in which parents could get comfortable with what was missing in their own infancies and actually be able to develop and hand it on to their babies, that they felt looked after by Penny reading her books. Yeah.
And I think that, well, you've done that too, Dilys, in your book, Through the Night. making sense of some really difficult things that parents feel when they have babies. Thank you very much, Dilys, for your contribution. Really appreciate you joining us, and for the work that you've done with the Association of Infant Mental Health. If there's one thing that you think that Penelope's done, do you think it is this ability to communicate what's important about infants to a wider audience?
Yes, and especially that they actually need to be looked after and not disciplined. And yes, and I think what you've written about controlled crying is one of the things that I've quoted most when I've been writing about it. But actually, that you don't control from outside, but you actually work it out from what's going on between you. Yeah. Mm.
Thank you so much, Dilys. Did you want to say anything, Penny?
Only thank you, really. And perhaps to make the point that Dilys and I were friends too. And I think that's part of what makes this kind of working together work. I think I'm down as a joint founder of AIM, which I actually wasn't. I only was one of the first in there with Dilys.
But one of the things that I admired most was the supporting other professionals, and especially those who had less official training than others, people like childminders, and how much you gave to them, yes. Mm-hmm. And I was just thinking this morning that one of the things we meant to do was to do something similar for maternity nurses. Yes. And I don't think we managed that. So perhaps we could, we tried that 20 years ago. Perhaps we could have a go at it.
It's not too late, Dilys.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much, Dilys. Thanks for that. Mm. Dr. Sebastian Kramer is also joining us today. He was a consultant psychiatrist at the Tavistock Clinic, and then paediatrician at the Whittington Hospital in London until a few years ago, and still very active in the infant mental health world. For those of you on Twitter will know just how active Sebastian is, sharing all things about infant mental health and child mental health. It's been really good to connect with you in that way, Sebastian, and great that you can join us today. I know that you're particularly admiring of how Penelope has campaigned politically for children on a political level. She's been one of those clinicians and researchers who hasn't been afraid to have a voice in politics.
Absolutely. I mean, I was thinking about what Dilys was saying about friendship, that the first thing I really wanted to get from Penny over the years was the notion that children benefit when their parents and their other caregivers are friends. Mm. And the impact of that obvious fact. I mean, this is simply an extension of the environment of evolutionary adaptiveness that Bowlby talked about. The people who look after children have to get on with each other. And the children know that, and they know when they don't. And that comes across very clearly from what we've been hearing today. And it also comes across in this book here. Where's the screen? Can you see it?
Yes.
I reread this book in the last week or two. It's a masterpiece, Penny. I mean, it's so beautifully written. You don't realize that it's a work of great scholarship, Fabian socialism, attachment science, and feminism, actually. And there are 23 pages of references at the end, tucked away quietly, so you don't actually have to look at them, but actually they're a book in themselves. So I want to pick up on that, Penny, and ask you a few questions about child places, which is the concept you introduce towards the end of that book, which seemed to be very clearly a model for children's centres, which were not yet in existence in Britain, except in child and family centres occasionally, like the one in Park Hill Road, where I worked as a trainee. But first, I just want to mention two things about the book, the writing of the book, how you grabbed the experience of new parents so beautifully that, people always talk about how stressful it is. Here's a phrase which you could have written from your own experience as well. The new mother whose old life and identity is an unraveled tangle in the infant's innocent fists. I mean, this is almost Shakespearean in its power. You know, the fists of the infant are saying, you've got to do something different now. And you then go on to talk about that the infant has to find reliable ways of controlling some aspect of adult behavior. This is vitally important. And of course, that the infant's identity depends on that. And also, very briefly, on page 260, I found the phrase mobile modems. This is in 1994. How could you be so up to date? It's absolutely amazing. Okay, child places. You were on the John Smith's Commission on Social Justice, not to be confused with the Centre of Social Justice, founded by Ian Duncan Smith. This is John Smith, another Smith, in my book, A Better Smith. And there was Ruth Lister and Tony Atkinson and other people. I wanted to ask you, when I've said a bit about what child places are in your book, how much your thinking influenced the creation of Sure Start. But here's a bit about the child places. The first thing is that it actually shows that the children benefit because the professionals and the parents all get on with each other, as I said earlier, doing things for each other, not doing things for or to parents. A facility provided, here I'm quoting, provided for children and run partly by parents easily becomes central to the lives of young families. And then, because most people, the baby blindness is, you know, oh, they're sitting there. There's some mums sitting there with some babies. That's very interesting. Can we get on with something more important? Well, you unpack it. Actually, the children get to know each other too. The children get to know professionals. They get to know the other parents. So you get something of the extended family from which we were all descended. So can you remember what it was like being on that commission and whether you were able to embed some of these ideas?
Yes, I can. And Sebastian, thank you, because Children First is actually the book I'm proudest of. I actually think it's the best book I've written, though, you know, buyers wouldn't agree. It wasn't a bestseller by any means. Yes, I can remember very clearly what it was like being on that commission. And what it was like was that John Smith made it clear that provided he liked the findings of the commission, they would be the Labour manifesto to come. And if he hadn't gone and died, I think we would have a very, very different Labour Party. So that's a kind of sadness. And the book, I mean, there's a book on the commission, which people can read, and people did read it, but it didn't, like so many things I've talked about today, it didn't go into policy. Nothing was done. And it's sad because a lot of the things in the commission are things that I was writing about in Children First, like the fact that if two partners each worked a 4-day week rather than a 5-day week, they could in fact manage without paid childcare. Now, don't ask me how, because it's quite a long, complicated story, but it's factual. Why did nobody pick that up, I wonder? Anyway, they didn't, so there we are. But Sebastian, thank you. I could say as many nice things about your work as you said about mine, so thank you hugely.
Well, thank you, Penny. I mean, I think the point is that you're not naive about policy, and you weren't then and you aren't now, because in a way, it's so difficult to get past people's resistance to thinking about such poignant things as what babies feel and what toddlers feel. But here you are writing about what the staff actually have to do in a children's centre, which of course is quite different from what a job description says. Here, they have teams of professional staff, ancillary workers and volunteers with the flexibility, support and self-confidence to ignore or sidestep many of the limitations normally imposed by bureaucratic job descriptions. And then you describe very clearly the cynical or naive policymakers and bureaucrats often demand that complex programs refine themselves into magic bullets. They don't realize that in order to achieve that, they will have to duck the most difficult targets that were the original raison d'etre. In other words, you abandon the target, the most disadvantaged people, in order to get a good result. Interestingly, I have to plug the IFS study, Institute for Fiscal Studies study, which shows just how brilliantly Sure Start did actually for the most disadvantaged children. The poorest ones made the greatest gains because they weren't admitted to hospital. But if you brought this book out now, most of it would be, I mean, you'd have to refine your comments on gender and so on, but you wouldn't have to update your technology. I do think if you could be bothered, you should re-edit it and write it again.
Sebastian, let me bring out the new Your Baby and Child first. Yes. And then if I'm still alive, I might think about it, but I'd have to be sure anybody wanted to publish it. And, you know, the big study that I did with Jacqueline, the Families, Children and Childcare study, one of the most important findings of that whole 7 years was that the better a parent got on with a childminder or child carer, the better the result for the children. Exactly. It was more important, it appears, than how well that carer got on with the child. So Sebastian's absolutely right to raise that.
Well, I hope that's embedded in policy. I mean, there are some things that people can understand without being defensive about it. And that seems to be something that even the frightened policymakers sitting in Westminster, who are refugees from attachment, essentially, could understand.
Thanks very much.
You have a go. I've tried, you try.
Talking about the Families, Children and Childcare study, this is a longitudinal study of 1,200 children and families that was conducted by a research team led by yourself, Penny, Professor Kathy Silver, Professor Alan Stein at the University of Oxford, and Professor Jacqueline Barnes, who's with us today. Jacqueline, welcome. It's really good to have you here. It was one of the largest studies of childcare in the world. And Penny, your book, Childcare Today, What We Know and What We Need to Know, which was written for parents and draws on the study and its many peer-reviewed papers. You say it was this relationship that between the child carer and the parent that was absolutely crucial. And you also found that it was gender that was that little boys were more vulnerable biologically than little girls.
That's true. I think most people would agree that vulnerability spreads quite widely. I mean, it's true of physical health, after all.
Yeah. And Professor Jacqueline Barnes, are you with us now? Oh, I can see you're unmuted. Great. And you were one of the directors of the national evaluation of Sure Start, and you've got more than 40 years experience of both longitudinal and intervention research with young children and families. What do you think Penelope's contribution has been to our understanding of such issues like childcare?
Well, I'd have to say that, you know, what Sebastian has been talking about, influencing policy, is something that's very difficult to overcome. When I was doing my PhD at the Thomas Corn Research Unit, we had seminars about how do you influence politicians, and I don't think that researchers have actually really beaten that. You know, you can do the most beautiful study, which I think the Families, Children and Childcare was a beautifully designed and well-conducted study, but to make that leap into policy is actually very hard. I've been looking through the many papers that were published about the study, and there are a huge number, and the website I hope you can direct people to. But it was, I think, important because up till that point, policymakers and parents were always seeking advice based on American research. And Penny and Kathy and Alan were really keen to produce good quality UK evidence so that we can see, it's they're very different countries. We have slightly better even then maternity care and maternity leave and obviously National Health Service and various other things. And so the Family, Children and Childcare Study really set the standard for getting good quality UK evidence. And it started very young. You could tell that Penny was really concerned about the first year of life because we had 2 contacts in the first year of life, and there was a lot of qualitative information collected. And that really helped to flesh out the more sort of quantitative things about how many hours of care. But even that was collected in a beautifully detailed way with diaries that mothers could fill in. And so we got a really good picture of what was happening. And we were able to look at unusual, at that time, characteristics such as primary caregiving fathers and give fathers as much of a voice as we could. I'd have to say that having to try and collect the data, fathers were rather unresponsive in lots of ways. And it was quite difficult to get them to fill in all the questionnaires, but a lot of them did. So that meant that we could look at the impact of not just mother's mental health in the first year of life, which we found to be a substantial impact, but also father's mental health. And during the years after the basic team wrote papers, some students, like some I've supervised, have managed to work with detailed data to investigate things like father's mental health in a much more detailed way. And that's one of the legacies of this study. And I was going to promote the fact that the data are available, and I can give anybody who gives me details of what they want access to the data still, so that people can investigate more about the very rich data.
So Jacqueline,
Yes.
I know there's a website that's called Families, Children and Childcare Study. I think quite a lot of it's
called
there.
familieschildrenchildcare.org.
Right, that's it.
All one word, familieschildrenchildcare.org.
So a lot of it's there, isn't it?
Yes. But we did some interesting qualitative interviews with mothers who started work early. And this is one of the things that Penny was really interested in, is mothers who had gone back to work before their baby was 6 months old. And some of the findings are fascinating because they talked about the things like the relationship and that they were sort of concerned to get on well with the caregiver, but they were also feeling guilt and also envy. They were really worried that by having someone else look after their child, that they would somehow lose importance for the child. And that's one of the things that really, was sort of sad, but important to know that that's the sort of experience that mothers were having. And that the larger data showed that it was actually the disadvantaged mothers who were the most likely to have returned to work before their baby was 3 months old. And so the most vulnerable ones were likely to be experiencing this, and possibly, in fact, likely to have less high quality care, because we looked a lot at quality of care and found that up to 18 months of age, nurseries didn't provide the best quality. It was any sort of home environment. And this is one of the good things about this study, that it looked at every single type of childcare you could imagine. So not just childminders and nurseries, but grannies, relatives, friends, nannies, any sort of childcare. We included it all. So we were able to find out a lot about these sort of things. And all of the home-based care was of higher quality than the nurseries for the young children, except that the nurseries had more learning materials, but whether the staff would actually use them in a sensitive way is another matter. But on this, the scale we used has some data about quantitative things, how many toys are available. And funnily enough, the grandparents were rated as the least safety conscious. But I think that probably they had compensated for that with lots more cuddling and playing. But the scales are really sort of developed with nurseries in mind rather than home environments. But you could see that in the first couple of years of life, that the Family, Children and Childcare Study really highlighted some of the important issues. And this was started in 1998. So before Ofsted was actually looking at child minding. And so they were providing good quality before that. And as you know, Penny was the president of the Child Minding Association. They were very interested in the study, and we made presentations to them because it showed that the sort of care that they gave to infants was really supportive, and they were able to make relationships with the parents and more easily and care for the young children much better. The study obviously has other sort of more standard findings that, you know, that good quality care can lead to better cognitive development. And one of the things that I was investigating was starting early actually can lead to better outcomes. If you start in some sort of care and carry it through, that cognitively you are stimulated, but it has to be good quality. It can't be just any sort of care. That's one of the big messages. I mean, there are so many findings that we can't really sort of talk about them all now, but I think that knowing
Sorry, go ahead, Jacqueline.
No, I just think that the parents' mental health we investigated in quite a lot of detail, and their aspirations. One of the sad things was we asked parents about their aspirations for childcare in the first year, and by the end of the first year, only fewer than a third were actually using the care that they had said that they would be their ideal. And so the idea of choice is actually a bit of a misnomer for most families, and that was something that really jumped out. That, you know, they had all these dreams at 3 months, and by the end of the year, so many things had happened that they were facing realities and making choices that weren't really what was their ideal choice.
Sadly, child minding didn't take off in the way I hoped it would. Hasn't. I mean, there are childminders, there are lots of childminders, but there are more day nurseries and more nurseries taking very young children. And one of the reasons that I think is part of the baby blindness is that parents are afraid that if their child is with an individual, a childminder whom they get to know and to love and becomes almost like a day foster mother, they themselves will lose their primacy to the child. And that came up in the study, as Jacqueline says, and it's still something people say today as a reason why they'd rather have a nursery place, even for a 9-month baby.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Jacqueline. Your microphone was just making a funny noise then, so I muted you. Thanks for that. And one other thing I just wanted to mention to you is that you and Penelope, I believe, went to California together to
Florida.
for the Penelope Leach town that was being built over there.
Yes.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Sorry, Penelope. Sorry.
It was one of the few examples of argument getting into policy. To my absolute amazement, a group of businessmen in Florida decided to build a Penelope Leach Children First Town. You can imagine how stunned I was by this extraordinary idea. It wasn't as extraordinary if you lived in Florida, because they had golf towns and horse riding towns and fishing towns, and this was to be a Children First town. But what Jacqueline has discovered, and I'd lost track, is that it's still going. They don't call it Penelope Leach anymore. I'm much too old to name a town, but some of the things I recommended are still going on. Like, for instance, if you send your child to one of the schools in the town, you are guaranteed that that child will be able safely to walk to and from school from the age of 5. Yeah. So that, sometimes somebody takes some notice. Just sometimes.
Great. That's a great story. Thanks, Penelope. We've been talking quite a lot about childminders and early years care. We've got Neil Leach here, who is the CEO of the Early Years Alliance, and also Teresa Johnson from PACEY. That used to be called the Professional Association of, it used to be called the National Childminding Association. I'm going to come to you in a moment, Teresa, but first, Neil, I just wonder what your thoughts are as the CEO of the Early Years Alliance about how Penelope's really led the way in championing children and crucially the people who look after them, whether they're carers or parents. She's really campaigned hard for them, hasn't she, about ensuring that children get proper care.
Absolutely. I think I have to start at least by saying, Penny, you are such an inspiration to so many people. And I hope you recognise that, but I'm telling you without a doubt that you are. I confess, a bit of a fraud here today because I'm not from an early years background. My background was finance. I used to chair the Finance Industry Standards Association. And about 18 years ago, I thought I'd taken early retirement or semi-retirement. And I was introduced to a charity, which was the Preschool Learning Alliance. Mm-hmm. I will never forget that actually my first sort of few weeks of induction as a volunteer, thrust upon me were several books that you had actually authored. And I was basically touched by everything that you did at that particular point in time. And in particular, the message that you have that parents are children's first and foremost educators, not nurseries. Parents, and that we should be doing more to support parents. So that struck a chord with me. Just to say, my background is that I came from a single parent family. My father was abusive to my mother. I'm one of 6 children. We ended up in care homes. I left school when I was 14, and it was the best thing that I ever did. And it was then that I guess, listening to the Preschool Learning Alliance and its thoughts about early intervention that sort of touched me and it chimed with me. So I think the whole thing about early intervention is absolutely critical. And when you said earlier that you felt that we should have a minister specifically within the cabinet, that really runs true. And I didn't prepare, I confess, anything for today. I really wanted to just listen, but it prompted, I was fortunate enough a few months ago to have a half-hour one-to-one with the Chancellor. And we started the conversation, and it was quite clear how that conversation was going. It was really all about getting parents back to work. And he didn't say this, but he alluded to the fact that, well, Neil, if more parents are going to work from home, if there's going to be higher redundancies, isn't that contraction? Isn't that market equalization? Not once did we talk about the benefits to parents and to children, not once. And it was that point I thought, I've got to say something here. So in a slightly more polite way, I said to him, of course, only an idiot would think that this is about just getting parents back to work. And we concluded the conversation with him saying to me, Neil, you need to get the Secretary of State for Education to make a better case for early years. So when you said a minister within the cabinet, it struck home to me, full stop. It's just one other little thing I think that emphasizes your point about the sort of blind spot. Colleagues on this sort of Zoom call may be aware that a few weeks ago, we got the findings of a Freedom of Information request that we basically put in back in December 2018. At that point in time, government were constantly saying, we invest enough in early years, basically £3.6 billion, more than any other government, same rhetoric time after time. And so we said to them, well, if you think you invest enough, and this specifically was about the free entitlement, then show us how you came to those figures, show us your computations. 2.5 years later, after legal battles and with the ICO ruling in our favor, we finally got that information. And what that information showed was that their internal documentation said that by 2021, the cost of delivering a single hour of childcare and education to a 3- and 4-year-old would cost £7.49. And what did we get? £4.89. And in their own documentation, they said, we can't afford that. That would cost us another £2 billion. So what we will do is we will make them work to maximum ratios. And so when you're talking about young children, and I know that you would love the one-to-one situation, but what they were saying is you have no margin, make them work so they have no margin to deal with any extraordinary circumstances, any special needs, any additional support. That's what we will ask them to do. And they also said, and we recognise that they will have to put up the costs to families with younger children by up to 30%. So that sort of tells me, I used to think there was a blind spot right across all of early years, but those two factors specifically had a detrimental impact on younger children, as far as I could see. I could go on forever just to say, you're brilliant, fantastic. You must be frustrated that we still argue the same things as you were arguing probably decades ago, but we carry on.
Well, it was Freud in 1942 who first made the point about the vital importance of attachment to very young children. So we've been at it for I can't do the arithmetic, but we've been at it since then.
Thank you very much, Neil. And as I said, Teresa Johnson from the Professional Association of Childcare in Early Years is with us. And you used to be president of the National Childminding Association, didn't you, Penelope, I think?
Yes.
Some years ago, which did become PACEY. It changed its name. Teresa, we've been talking a little bit about Penny, and she's been championing today and has been championing today for many, many years, the importance of childminders.
Yeah, absolutely. And lovely to see you, Penny. Penny, I think I've worked at PACEY for 17 years, so our paths would have crossed when you were president, and yes, probably in those days when we used to have conferences and national policy forums, and the good old days when lots of people came together, didn't they, in person, and we did lots of amazing work. So you've always been a massive advocate of home-based childcare, Penny, haven't you? And that's resonated and was really useful, I think, when you were president too. But like Neil said, I think the thing that is slightly depressing in all of this is that we have to keep having the same conversations, and we have to keep saying the same things. And you know, PACEY as an organisation has been doing that for over 40 years, and it makes me quite sad that even, you know, to raise the profile, particularly of childminding as a profession, raising that profile not just for parents but also amongst professionals as well. So we still find that there are myth busting that we have to do, still misconceptions about what home-based childcare is, the fact that it's Ofsted regulated and registered, and that actually these people are delivering the early years curriculum the same way that nurseries and preschools are. So continually saying the same thing, battling the same battles, but also recognising the value, I think, of that smaller ratios and different age groups being cared for at the same time. And the point you made, I think, about the impact of that relationship between, you know, that caregiver and the parents as well, and the extra mile, I think, that all childcare providers go for families. They're not just providing childcare, are they? They're providing a whole host of other information and signposting and support for all the parents of the children that they're caring for, and that's hugely valuable, I think. And I think that, as you said, pick that up in your research, that relationship is really crucial. And it's something that they have to do as part of the framework that they follow. But that partnership with parents is just, you know, a sentence. But what does it mean? What's the kind of depth to that partnership? What does that really mean? What's that effective partnership look like? So I just wanted to thank you, Penny, for being president for all those years. But just to say, we continue, as Neil said, to fight the fight, and alongside, you know, talking to ministers and government as well around, you know, the equality of that and what that looks like. So thank you. It's been a real privilege to be here today.
Don't give up.
We won't.
Thanks, Teresa. Much appreciated. Robin Balboni is also with us today. He's a consultant child and adolescent psychotherapist and was in the Gloucestershire Child and Adolescent Mental Health Service. Robin, you've worked in a lot of children's centres in Gloucestershire and as clinical lead of the team. How important do you think Penny's work has been in terms of how professionals and parents see babies and young children?
I think Penny, through her books, and I'm speaking personally here, showed that it's not just enough to be fond of babies and look at babies from the outside. You do actually need a certain understanding of their sort of internal processes. of their developmental stages, of the way that they see the world and are capable of seeing the world. And that's something that I think any child psychotherapist would take into a work setting. I was lucky enough to work, my infant mental health team was, for most of its life, was based in children's centres, which was a real privilege. And I was also part of the, along with Penny and Dilys, part of setting up the Sure Start consultations. And that idea of marrying a practice with the right amount of theory and at the right level is really important. And that's something that Penny has had as a real gift for putting across to both professionals and the general public. And she has a knack of altering her sort of communicative repertoire on the audience, which she seems to do quite seamlessly, and which I'm quite jealous, really. Oh. And her insights, I remember vividly when I became first involved with the Association of Infant Mental Health, and I walked into a room and there were all these rather scary, imposing ladies. There was Dilys, there was Penny, there was Juliet Hopkins, Lynn Murray, Joan Raphael-Leff, and then just Sebastian and me sitting in the corner. But since then, I've really come to respect and enjoy working with Penny, because that was my first introduction, and seeing how she can translate ideas into practice. I remember, for instance, speaking of children's centres, she produced a little leaflet, which was the No Smacking Guide. I think it was to good parenting, which has largely gone unnoticed and unmentioned today, but that was a brilliant leaflet. And when she wasn't looking and she brought a selection to a meeting, I snaffled 2/3 of them. And we used them in the children's centre and across Gloucestershire as handouts for years, just because they were so simple and straightforward and non-judgmental, but also explanatory. Again, coming back to showing the baby's point of view and how the baby might, if the baby had words, how the baby might view what was going on. And I think that's one of Penny's gifts.
Thank you. I hope you're right. That's a lovely gift to have.
Yeah, I think you need a medal for being a baby voice.
Thanks, Robin. Graham Music is also with us. He's a consultant child psychotherapist and on the board of MINDinMIND. Now, people think that because we're child psychotherapists that we know what to do with our own children, but you found Penelope's writings really helpful, haven't you, Graham?
Yeah, more than helpful. I haven't got much to add to all the really amazing things people have said about this extraordinary woman, but I will say, as a parent who is desperate, I think I was saved by Penny's works, and I have to admit that I used to sleep with her book under my pillow, knowing that with the pages turned, there's so many corners turned that I wouldn't know where to go to, but I knew that I'd find what I needed when I woke in the middle of the night and something had to be done. And I'm forever grateful to you, Penny, for just the ordinary common sense wisdom, so deeply informed by all the things that so many people here care about: attachment theory, neurobiology, developmental psychology, psychoanalytic psychotherapy, all of these things. But you just speak about them so seamlessly, as if they're just who you are.
Thank you, Graham.
Graham, I know that you use Penelope's work in your teaching about children, childcare, and about child mental health generally. And you've got a clip, haven't you?
Oh yeah, I've got. So actually, I'm also really grateful that Penny would come and teach on the course that I run at the Tavistock about child development. And my goodness, they didn't know how lucky they were, those students. I've got a quick moment from a telly just to give a flavour of Penny a few years ago, if that's all right. If I can do this.
I haven't seen it.
I bet you have.
We got it.
Yet the world's most distinguished writer on mothers and babies is British and has been warning for years that nurseries may not be giving babies what they need.
Babies can use lots of loving people, provided they know them all. But they do need a central, special person with them pretty well all the time. And when that isn't going to be mum or dad, it needs to be somebody who stands in, who bridges that gap. Nursery staff are undermotivated, underpaid, undertrained, underappreciated, under everything. And they cannot do well by our babies if nobody is doing well by them.
So brilliant. So breaching attachment theory couldn't have been put better. Understanding babies, campaigning for nurseries, campaigning for what babies, infants need, all there as always, I think. And I also, as a parent, I must say, I'm incredibly grateful. Also as a father, I'm incredibly grateful, really, Penny, for some of the things that you've put on the agenda. So you've talked about. One of the fascinating things about that research study about early childcare, I think you said that when mothers were asked what would their ideal childcare be, if no money, no object, etc., I think about 0.5% said they would like the father to be the primary caregiver, and at the end of the day, it was about 9%, I think, and that really shook me actually when I first heard that. And you've always been incredibly supportive of fathers and partners, because you've always been really, really clear that it's good relationships that breed good relationships. And I think that's so central. In a way, you have in a way been the heir of Winnicott, but done it much better in many, many ways, I think. And that's one of the things that Winnicott always used to talk about as well. And you've just a final word for me. I just think it's true, you don't suffer fools gladly. We need people like you to be really clear about what infants and babies need. And sometimes you've said things which have been a bit controversial for some people. I think you were very, very misquoted around that area where you talked about the fact that babies shouldn't just be shunted between parents after divorce, and you were very brave in what you said, and it still absolutely stands up. And absolutely, we need people like you who can speak from the heart and not afraid to say the truth and not afraid to put people's backs up a bit in order to get what infants and children need. And although I agree about the stuff that was said before about childminding, I also think things have changed dramatically. Things have changed quite a lot in terms of people's understanding of childcare, of babies, of infant need, of parents. And an awful lot of that comes down to the work that you've done over the years. So just a final thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Penny, you've done, thank you very much, Graham. And as Graham said, you've championed fathers. What is it about fathers that, why have you done that? What is it that really has made you quite impassioned about how important fathers are in babies' lives?
Relationships are what make people, particularly in the first 18 months. All the aspects of a baby's brain that contribute to his humanity are forming, and that means they're very open to influence relationships from outside. And if that baby is lucky enough to have two parent figures or two caregivers, then both will be hugely important. There's a lot of very interesting work on the difference between mothering and fathering. No time to go into it now, but it isn't the same. And part of the reason why people sometimes get upset about fathers is that biologically mothers come first, and there's no getting away from that because it's her uterus that the fetus grows up in. So, fathers have to come in after the event, after the birth, but they do, and it's hugely important. What I think used to be the case, and maybe still is, I hear some horrible stories about court decisions on custody. Very small children were being assigned to fathers they scarcely knew. And although I was shouted at for suggesting that a 1-year-old shouldn't be spending a week with father away from mother, what I was saying was that it depends on the relationship they'd already got. And I think that's understood now, better understood anyway.
I just want to say We've got some time for questions from our audience. We've got a considerable number of people, 78 people here gathered to hear Penny. And if there's anything you want to say, anything you want to ask Penny, then please put that in the chat. Hayley Can says, thank you. It has been a pleasure joining you and hearing the interview from Perth in Australia. I look forward to hearing the last hour in the recording. I met Penny 35 years ago in the UK when she asked me to participate in a parenting video to demonstrate the serve and return that took place when breastfeeding. Her passion and desire to support parents to put their children first, and her books helped me to raise 2 sons who are now fathers themselves. I'm delighted to share that we have all benefited from Penny's expertise, wisdom and knowledge. I enjoyed being a parent so much that I wanted to change my career and went on to become a Sure Start director in Kent. I've continued my passion in infant mental health and child development and enjoy my role as a grandmother, as well as supporting vulnerable families in Western Australia. She said good night. That's giving me goosebumps. That's amazing, isn't it? To hear that, Penny?
Yes, yes. Well, I'm honoured. What else can I say? I really am.
And when you're thinking, I mean, I'm wondering, you know, you're talking about you working very hard on the latest rewrite of Your Baby and Child, which you hope to come out next year. What keeps you working? You're still very productive.
What keeps you working? What would I do if I wasn't working? I'd be bored silly. I think that's, I mean, the real answer is that it's what really interests me. Will that do as an answer? It's the only answer I've got.
I think that's, and I know that you said that you found babies endlessly fascinating.
I do.
It's themselves.
I do, and I find it very hard to understand people who don't find them interesting, because they clearly are, you know.
And another great passion, which I know has been alluded to, but we haven't talked about too much yet, is about your campaigning against smacking.
Right.
Physical punishment of children. You're involved in the NSPCC and its sister organisations in Ireland and the United States and Canada, and the Children's Rights Development Unit, which work to promote the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child in the UK. This is really close to your heart, isn't it?
It is, and I find it quite difficult to understand why people find the idea of children having equal rights with older people so difficult to address. The problem with the anti-smacking campaign, I think, is that people resent the idea that by making it illegal, you're criminalizing parents. Well, actually, of course, you're not. The fact that something is against the law doesn't mean people have to be prosecuted and punished. In fact, in England, a lot of people believe that smacking children is already illegal. I know that because I hear them telling each other, oh, you mustn't do that, it's against the law. And I don't correct them. But it isn't. It's against the law in Northern Ireland, in Scotland, in Wales. I would love to see the law changed here before I die, but it ain't going to be this government that does it.
Yeah. We've got a question from Laura Tennant asking, I would love to hear more about the difference between fathering and mothering, if there's time. I know that Dilys Dawes has written about the triangulation that a baby benefits from, that there's 2 different perspectives that a baby benefits from having. What would you say about the differences between mothering and fathering that benefit a baby?
Well, there's quite a lot of evidence that fathers react differently to babies from mothers, men from women. A lot is said about fathers' rough and tumble play, which by 15 months or so is so popular with many babies, but not so popular with many mothers. But I don't think that's the essence of it. I think the point about the triangulation is to have more than one approach to what you're doing, what you're saying, who you are. And I think that's hugely valuable.
David and Serena Dweck are asking here, saying, I used Penelope Leach's advice 30 years ago. It became my Bible. What would the major changes in advice given to parents, what would be the major changes in advice given to parents since? Has any of your advice particularly changed?
There's so much I don't know how to answer. It isn't so much change of advice, it's change of context. For instance, in the United States, it is now considered quite wrong to use any kind of covering or wrapping or blanketing or soft toy in a baby's cot, because there's a tiny extra chance of the tiny risk of smothering. Now, it makes life very difficult because I'm not sure that left to myself, I would follow that. If it was my baby, it would probably have a teddy bear and a blanket, just as they always did. But if you're writing for parents in an environment, you must address what other advisors are saying. And if this is what the American health professionals believe, then it's not for me to say otherwise. So what can you do? The only thing you can do is say more or less that. You know, I'm not sure that everybody would agree with this, but this is what the American Association for Infant Health says.
Samantha Street is saying here, this is a lovely story. I read my mother's copy of Baby and Child when I was 14, when my baby sister was born. I went on to become a childminder and have been for 18 years. Penelope's writing has been the greatest influence on my practice and mothering, and I am delighted to have heard her speak today. Thank you.
Thank you, that's lovely.
Lorraine says, at the age of 16, I became a mother's help for a family with a toddler and a newborn baby that I had sole charge of at 8 weeks. Whilst that may sound horrifying, the children's mother handed me a copy of Penelope's book and pretty much let me get on with raising her children. I did it for 2.5 years. Today, 50 years later, I'm training to work with children therapeutically. Oh, wow. I'm honoured to have been here this afternoon, as Penelope was not only my saviour back then, but for those children.
Lovely.
It's really lovely, isn't it?
Mm.
Looking back on your career, Penelope, I'm wondering what do you hope would be the legacy of your work?
Oh, wow. I think legacy is a lovely word and a lovely description of this event, but I don't really quite see it as legacy because I haven't stopped and I don't plan to stop. So my legacy is only as far as I've got with these various things I've tried to do. It would be lovely if we had more childminding, fewer nurseries, nobody smacked and so forth. But as long as there are campaigns to be fought and stuff to be written, and as long as I'm capable, I'll still be doing it.
And is there some aspects of your work that you're most proud of?
Pride's the wrong word, really. I'm amazed by today. Of course, I'm proud to have so many people saying nice things. Wouldn't anybody be? But no, the thing people would expect me to be proud of probably is Your Baby and Child, the book. I'm not proud of it, but I count myself as fantastically lucky because it's that book that's enabled everything else I've ever done, because it made money, it made reputation, and it made other publishers want to publish stuff I wrote. So lucky rather than proud.
So if anybody wants to ask a question, you're welcome to. You can use the function to put your hand up, to wave, if you want to unmute yourself and ask a question, or if you want to put something in the chat box, anything that you want to share about Penelope or a question that you have to ask.
As long as it's polite.
I'm sure we've only got polite people here today. You don't mind people asking controversial questions, though, do you, Penny?
No, not really.
No. Maria Scrooby says, so much resonates with regards to the courts and fathers. Cannot Penny put more pressure on family courts and health visitor training?
I worked very hard in the family courts with the man who was then, I can't think what the head of the family court is called, but that's what he was. And he got fired for being too nice to everybody. It's a very politically difficult area. Me put pressure. I can only talk and write and give the occasional talk. I don't have any power. And so the amount of pressure one can put is very limited.
Yeah. Laura Tennant's asking, what should we be researching that we're not? If you could commission another major study, what would it be?
Oh, that's interesting. It would be something to do with children's centres and locality. I believe that having central government make the decisions and put money without prescribing it specifically doesn't work. And I think we need to go back to a situation where our local authorities have power and money and can employ people to work in their own locality with people they know and mix up the professions and provide training for the many people who would like to take part in this kind of work. So something about local authority participation in children's centres would be my next big study.
Well, thank you very much for that, Penelope, and for really what's been a fascinating insight into your work over 6 decades, and as you say, still continuing. And we are all, I'm sure, really appreciative of you sharing your insights and wisdom. And we're very much looking forward to the next edition of Your Baby and Child out next spring. And just to say that a copy of this interview will be sent to all ticket holders when we've done a little bit of an edit and put our logo on it and things. Thanks to our panel of invited guests, Dr. Sebastian Kramer, Robin Balbirnie, Professor Jacqueline Barnes, Neil Leach, Teresa Johnson, Dilys Dawes, and Growing Music. We really, really appreciate you coming along today and sharing your reflections on Penny and about her work. Thanks to all of you, our audience today, for your questions and your comments. Many of you are becoming familiar faces at our webinars and interviews. So thank you so very much for coming back. We really appreciate it. And thanks too for keeping in touch with us about what your ideas and feedback are about what's important in child mental health and what you want to see featured on Mind in Mind. We really do value that. If you're new to Mind in Mind today, you can go to our website. It's mindinmind.org.uk, where you'll find other interviews there and podcasts and thought pieces with some incredible clinicians. Many of them are like Penelope, are true pioneers in child mental health. And you'll find, as I mentioned before, Penelope's thought piece about the baby blind spot, and also Graham Music's thought piece about the real causes of childhood obesity. That's really illuminating, and bringing together all of his insights on neuroscience as well as child development and the context of children being brought up in the society that we live in. If you register your details on our website, you'll be notified of new interviews and blogs that we're releasing regularly. Everything is free to access. So do watch out for our next legacy interview, which I'm delighted to say will be with the child psychotherapist Tessa Barradon, a much respected leader in the world of parent-infant psychotherapy. That's going to be in September. And look out for us on Twitter and LinkedIn, highlighting issues affecting child mental health. Do tag and follow us. It'd be good to hear from you. So you can find us there on Twitter and LinkedIn in particular. Not so good on Instagram yet. We're that's a work in progress, and Facebook. Mind in Mind is dependent on donations to keep growing. We'd be hugely grateful if you'd consider a donation, however small, to keep us growing, so that we can carry on disseminating the wisdom of clinicians and researchers in child mental health. You'll find a donate button on our homepage, and you can either make a one-off donation or a monthly donation. We're also looking for mental health professionals who've got media or publishing experience to volunteer with us to help us with our work. So please do contact me through the website if you'd like to get involved. Once again, Penny, thank you so much. There's lots of gratitude in the chat here, saying thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your life's work with us. It's hugely appreciated. It's been an honour for me.
And I want to say thanks to you, Jane. Best interviewer I know.
Well, it's very generous of you. Thanks. Thank you to everyone, and I hope you have a good rest of your weekend. Bye-bye.